Yes. Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmidyan Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Nadati Swapadantikam Namaham Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Charane Nirvishesha Shunyavani Pashyatya Desha Tarani Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Giradhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Today's lesson is number 7 on chapter 5, Science, part 2. Let me see here. From the beginning. Yes. Science, part 2. So, just a couple of slides before we actually start the lesson proper. This is a little different approach to preaching, so I'm emphasizing enjoyment instead of something spiritual, yoga, meditation, knowledge, etc. Because enjoyment casts a broader net, and Krishna consciousness has a science of enjoyment based on the Bhagavad Gita, the 3 modes of nature, the 3 levels of happiness. And culture instead of spiritual. So I know devotees like to say spiritual culture, but in a sense, yes, it is a spiritual culture, but spiritual is not well defined in this country, at least in modern society. So I use the word culture, and I use the strategy culture because it also casts a broader net, and that there's practical proof that the Vaishnava culture is superior. Practical proof in the sense that when compared with modern culture, it's superior. So the review of the previous lesson. In yesterday's lesson, we said that science is human-centric and without values, or it has a tradition of human centrism. Its method of acquiring knowledge and establishing reality are limited to observation. And I just gave one example of a court of law that doesn't require strict observation. It admits expert testimony and testimony of witnesses. Those are 2 methods for arriving at the truth. But science does not allow those, anything outside of direct observation. Statistics and probability are increasingly used in science today. This is something that we discussed. It's not that important, but it means that when science comes up with, sometimes scientific theories are based on probability, meaning that this is probably true, 70% probability or 90% probability, and they become attached to this method because these methods of probability are used in artificial intelligence. So they see some practical results, so they're attached to, in a sense, they're attached to imperfect knowledge in yet another way. Medicine is unnaturally important in modern culture. We discussed that in this morning's class, how there's far too much emphasis on health in modern culture because people are attached to their bodies, but higher than health is selfless service. And aside from comforts that science provides, people are most attached to the health cures provided by medical science. So, I inserted this slide also. Do I have to know all this? No. But it's useful to have heard these topics at least once. We must show the inferiority of modern global culture in order to establish the superiority of Vaishnava culture, if we're going to compare the two. I guess I could have said we should show the inferiority, give a little leniency. But if we're going to compare the two and show that Vaishnava culture is superior, then we should show that the other one is also inferior. And the presentation here that I'm doing in this course may sometimes be difficult to follow because it's presented in modern language. I made a pretty significant effort to take out language that we use in, say, Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada's language, or ISKCON language. So sometimes the language can seem strange, and it may not be obvious at first glance what are the scriptures that some of these things are based on. But unless these things are based, they're either based on ideas that are expressed in journal articles that scientists have produced, or newspaper articles, or indeed they are based on Prabhupada's statements. And if it has to do with Vaishnava culture, they're based on the Vedas, the Upanishads, Puranas, Bhagavad Gita. So now we start with the theory of evolution. So the theory of evolution is a key part of biology and many other sciences, especially the social sciences. So due to the evidence collected, many scientists accept the theory as fact, meaning unassailable truth. So if Prabhupada didn't like the theory of evolution, many religious people don't like it because it excludes the idea of God. So the theory depends on the idea of natural selection. Oh, I should say at the onset that the theory of evolution, those who strictly believe in the theory of evolution, understand that life is generated randomly, and that species evolve from one-celled or lower forms of life up to human life in a random fashion. There's no superior design. Now, the theory depends on the idea of natural selection. So natural selection means that the environment changes, for example, from extreme cold to hot. Then a species or a group within a species adapts to that change. That creates a new species, according to the theory of natural selection. And now, this is sometimes called survival of the fittest, but really the more accurate description is that environment changes and some parts of a species adapt to the change. Now, there are two, you could say, based on the theory, based on the scientific perspective, environmental change is random and the adaptation is random. But our understanding as devotees is that the higher powers control everything, that the environmental change is not random and neither is this adaptation. So, what is the definition of a species? Biologists define a species as a group of beings that can mate and produce offspring. Sometimes species mate with other species. For example, donkeys mate with horses to become mules. But the mules cannot mate to produce offspring. So that's how they define species. The Vedas describe species, but they're different from the above. Now back to natural selection. Again, natural selection is the key to the theory of evolution. It depends on the concept of survival by adapting to an environmental change. So survival of the fittest, as I mentioned, that is another word for that. Thus, evolution of consciousness or evolution of human society, evolution of religion do not conform to the theory of evolution. Sometimes devotees confuse the two, even many people confuse the two, but it's clear if you look up evolution of consciousness, you can see that it's a misnomer, and there are some people that say they should never even use that term because it's confusing. So again, evolution of consciousness, which is a popular idea that somehow our consciousness is evolving. It's kind of a hip or new age kind of thing that, oh, he's got higher consciousness, or he hasn't, sometimes people even say, his consciousness is evolved. But that's not, it's not a thing. It's according to science. It's just kind of like a theory, a philosophy. Evolution of human society is also philosophy. Evolution of religion is a bogus idea developed in the 1800s by some scientists who are now discredited. So they don't conform to the scientific theory of evolution. So the idea of a sudden appearance of mutants is fanciful and also does not conform. In other words, this is a modern sort of pop idea popularized by comic books, and so I'm referring to that as that these popular ideas that have come into the pop or sort of social fancy evolution of mutants or some more so-called evolved humans, it doesn't fit with the theory of evolution. So, what are the Vedas on evolution? The Vedas have a different, more complete description of evolution. The definition of life is not just survival, but it's existence, knowledge, and enjoyment. So those three things, Sat, Chit, Ananda. Environmental change and species adaptation are not random. A higher order determines both. Of course, higher order meaning Prakriti, the devas, demigods, the cycles, the yugas, and so all these different factors determine these kinds of changes. And the key difference is the acceptance of a higher order in nature that determines the changes and adaptations that we can see. The theory of evolution is misleading due to its omission of the higher order. One of the things that I insist is that, as far as I can determine, any society that has reverence for a higher order, it may be Vishnu, it may be Brahman, it may be some kind of nature worship in Africa or some little tribe, they have reverence for the higher order. So the tendency of those societies that revere higher nature is that they also have reverence for the lower nature. So in the modern materialistic society, they have no reverence for the higher order, which is generating the lower nature, the visible nature. So therefore, they have very little reverence for the lower nature. They think that it's theirs to exploit. And since I'm on the subject, theirs to exploit. In law, there are persons and objects. We are persons. Every human is a person. Everything else is an object. So if I can prove ownership of this floor, then in a court of law, then the floor is mine. Or if we have some dispute about the floor, if there's an Amazon rainforest and you claim ownership and I claim ownership, we can fight over that. There's no question that rainforest or this floor, anything has any rights whatsoever. Only people have rights. And everything else is an object. And people have the right to own all objects. It may be disputed between persons, but people have the right to own. And of course, governments are considered persons also. Collections of people, like corporations. Corpus means body. So a corporation is a collection of persons, so it gets the rights of a person. A government gets the rights of a person. But there's no thing in nature that has the rights of a person, with maybe 2 exceptions in the world. So the theory of evolution, little sidetrack. The theory of evolution is misleading due to its omission of the higher order. So that little sidetrack was kind of an example of how it's misleading. It diminishes nature. It depends on chance or random events and rejects higher determinism. So that gives rise to the idea that humans are self-determined. Humans can thus defy, oppose, conquer, and overexploit nature. What's preventing them? I'll tell you what's preventing them. In general, I mean, I'm making generalized statements. There's certainly exceptions. But one thing that's preventing them from overexploiting nature, causing too much harm, is pollution, something like global warming. So as soon as they can observe something like pollution, as soon as something inconveniences humans, they want to do something about it. But they have no values that say, I have to have reverence for nature because it belongs to Krishna. Nothing like that. It's only that, oh, I'm inconvenienced now, I have to do something about this. So this is, Ernst Mayr is a commentator on Darwin's. He commented favorably. He's a philosopher, and he commented favorably on the theory of evolution, and he explains it in a philosophical way by these 5 ways. He says that the world evolves, it's not static. A creation by God is implausible. It refutes any purpose of the universe. It, meaning the theory of evolution, refutes any purpose of the universe. So that means the universe, everything was created randomly, and because it's random, there's no purpose. It's just there, somehow randomly generated. I think people don't realize the implications of the theory of evolution. They just learn it in school sort of halfway and it just slides along. But it really does have a negative effect in modern culture. Then, number 4, it defeats the human-centric view. According to Meyer, he says the theory defeats the human-centric view. But in practice, since the 1800s, when the theory began with Darwin, there's no observable proof that it's diminished this human-centric view among scientists or among the general population. Number 5, physical systems explain the false idea of a design. So he's saying here that physical systems like ecosystems somehow explain the false idea of a intelligent design, like Christians would argue. So these 5 are basically refutations of the Christian religious perspective. So they seem to feel that if they can defeat the Christian perspective, then they've defeated all religions, which is naive, because Vedanta has more sophisticated ideas than the Christian religion. With all respect to Christianity, but Vedanta is more philosophically advanced. It appears Meyer thought that he was countering religion in general. So one, I'm going to go through some of these, not all this time. We'll cover some of these 5. Remember, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I think that we just do 2 here. No, we just do 1. Number 1, the world evolves. It's not static. So this is an easy one. Then here the Vedas have no disagreement. The universe is always changing. Nature, both animate and inanimate, acts in concert, guided by the higher powers. Modern global culture has only a physical view of the universe. Many past cultures with that view have vanished from the earth. In other words, atheism is not really tolerated. When people's values are selfish, are overly selfish, and they become destructive, then in general, throughout history, those, of course, people are always like that within a society. There are people, but to have an entire society that's based on selfishness and hedonism and atheism, generally these cultures don't last. So it's likely that today's materialistic culture will also die due to its destruction of nature. So that proves that the world does indeed evolve or change. Now, the next lesson, part 3, I can't remember whether I've divided it into 3 or 4. I think only 3. Meyer has established that evolution is a fact. He continues saying that it refutes God's existence and any purpose in the universe. He believes that the evolution theory defeats human centrism, but obviously it has not, because humans continue to be human-centric. And he states that the universe is not designed. It comes about randomly. So again, I just like to review the essence, as I'm calling it, the essence of this whole course is that the root cause of environmental problems is overconsumption. It can be controlled only through enjoyment or satisfaction that pervades the culture, and meaning satisfaction with less consumption. And exploitative and destructive enjoyment, meaning dissatisfaction, causing destructive enjoyment, pervades modern culture. So thus, the culture must be changed. Because it's so pervasive and it's at the root of the philosophies or the knowledge systems that influence the culture. And it can't be rooted out. The culture has to be changed. So these slogans, the environmentalist slogans and the practices that they're enacted or ineffective, they're superficial. And Vaishnava culture has the solutions. Basic solution is to learn to become satisfied with less consumption. So that satisfaction is not just through austerity, although austerity is one of the things that's part of Vaishnava culture. The primary enjoyment in Vaishnava culture is lila and nama. So that's the end of it. Any questions or comments? Hare Krishna.
So when we talk about having a higher order, this is spiritual. But yet you're saying that we're not going to present spiritual things to them. So what's the difference between presenting to them, your spirit soul and a spiritual reality?
Okay, when you say spiritual, what do you mean by spiritual?
Right.
So do you mean the same thing? Let's go out on the street and talk to 5 people on the street and see if we can get an agreement on the meaning of spiritual. That's the only the only true objection I have to not talking about spiritual. There's two objections, but the main objection is that the idea of spiritual is so it can be misleading. It strikes a person as, especially if people have a very open definition of spiritual. Then you could say spiritual, and then they say, "Oh, okay, then now I'll interpret that in a very open way." So higher order is a little more specific. Now, the reason I use higher order is because I want to contrast it, or I want to show it in conjunction with the lower order. Higher order, lower order. I decided not to use higher nature because I wanted to show system, higher system, and lower system. So I had three choices: higher order, higher system, or higher nature. So higher nature, lower nature. So what we're really talking about here is a visible nature and one that's subtle, that's beyond our sight, that's spiritual. Absolutely right. But so the three choices of words: order, system, or nature. I didn't like nature because I felt it didn't really communicate this concept of random or order, random or system. So nature doesn't really conform. So order or system. So lower systems, higher systems, it just didn't ring true. So order. I chose higher order, lower order. I had to make all these choices. And then the second reason, spiritual, one is, as I said, because it's ill-defined in the public. Second reason is that I feel that use of certain words, then it becomes a distraction to people. Yeah. Just like if you have to be careful if you make an analogy of something, then people get carried away with the analogy. You have to be careful about how direct you are with your what you're trying to communicate. So if I say spiritual, then immediately, oh, well, I don't believe in religion. Something like that. Immediately people can respond. No, we're not talking about religion. We're talking about culture here. And comparing two cultures, and which one is more. So I don't want to distract from the main thrust. Decisions, a lot of decisions. Now, when you get a little older, you can rewrite everything I've done. And once you've learned how things work practically in society, and you can do it more effectively, I'm sure. But for now, I'm convinced that I'm presenting something that's solid. I think this is a good direction to go. But whether it's perfect, no, it's not perfect. Hare Krishna.